Hello again, everyone. This is Jeff Adler, continuing my video series, following up on my book, Why I'm Right. Um, Today in chapter 12, we're going to talk about liberal icons, which are a list of men and women in our fairly recent history, like going back um, not much more than 100 years of people who have inspired modern day liberals and have uh, been pioneers in progressivism, liberalism, and whatnot. And these actors who have started uh, movements, organizations, philosophies, if you will, that have made up the modern liberal, and discuss, who these people really are. Um, a lot of it can be said that a person can be judged, if you want to judge somebody, based on a few factors. Some people that they hang out with, uh, your associations. It can be said you can be judged by the friends you keep, the people or the groups that you seem to constantly cross through or visit, meet, that walk through your life or whose lives you walk through. Um, the company you keep, as it were. It is often more telling than trying to figure this out on your own. And it is also telling who you consider to be your idols, who you consider to be your role models. It says a lot about who you are. Now, conservatives like myself find role models in conservatives and other things that are truly American, truly conservative, um, what we like to consider as uh, right thinking, righteous, etc. If I were more religious than I probably am, I'd probably have role models that would go down that path as well. But liberals' role models tend to be liberal, of course. But any fair comparison of role models and who they consider their favorites and their icons and their mentors and the rest, up against those that say someone like I would consider, um, I I would have to say that they have a lot to be worried about in terms of that comparison. I Just like when we had our video about the difference, the history of the Democrat Party versus the Republican Party. Why anyone would I can't figure out why anyone would want to be associated with the Democrat Party, knowing their history, not just in the past, but the continuation of their um, hatred of blacks in a different form like they have today. Why anyone would want anything to do with that is beyond me. Well, why anyone would want to associate themselves with these liberal icons is also just as bewildering to me. But they keep propping them up. They keep bringing them out. Sometimes they don't do it because they're embarrassed, but their history of attaching themselves to these people cannot be just swept under the rug as they'd like to be. And they can't disassociate themselves from them, because even if history has gone past, they're still doing the things that these icons have told them to do. They're still creating this, or recreating, or involving themselves in the same movements. They're still joining the same organizations. They're still doing the things that the people that they call their icons from before, and I'm too embarrassed to admit to now, were doing 100 years ago, or 70 years ago, or 40 years ago, what have you. So they can complain all they want about associations, and rightly they should if their associations are as bad as they are. And just how bad are they? Well, let's just talk about that. Um, First of all, understanding that one of those associations with the left wing political spectrum of this country has deep and meaningful, substantive connections to both the socialism and communism. These are definitely not right wing associations. Okay, there was actually have used to be a socialist party in the United States. Of course, there are variations of it that pop up now and then, in disguise sometimes, like the Green Party or some other natural law party, all this other gobbledygook, which is socialism in disguise. But there actually was an American Socialist Party that started in 1901 and actually didn't end until 1972. There have been many communist parties in the United States. One or more just still exist to this day, in fact. If you think you're going to win a presidency or any major office running in on such a ticket, knock yourself out. Good luck. Not going to happen. But they still exist, which in a way is not just a thumb in your nose, not just a slap in the face of Americans, but also a reminder that this thinking is still prevalent, and it needs to be understood, and it needs to be pushed back whenever it rises and raises its ugly head. Now, there have been some famous, if not infamous, people that belonged to these parties in the past. And we, in previous videos, talked about the actors and famous celebrities that were associated with socialism and communism. But they're not the only ones. And in fact, they were probably less influential in a meaningful way than the celebrities were. Members of the Socialist Party in the past have been people that you may not even know their names, some of which we will discuss. Some of them you'll be like, really? That person? I don't have a long list here, but Eugene V. Debs was a member of the Socialist Party. Helen Keller, believe it or not, was a member of the Socialist Party of America. Jack London, the writer. Walter Lippmann, Margaret Sanger, we've mentioned her, we'll go into her. Upton Sinclair, a writer. There's also been some people who just figured, look, I'm already a socialist, I might as well admit I'm also a communist, and I'm going to join the Communist Party. Some actually joined both parties. W.E.B. Du Bois, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, the actor Will Geer from the Waltons, played Grandpa Walton, was a big-time communist. Jim Jones, we mentioned him in the last video, the guy who conducted the mass suicide in Guyana. Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of Robert Oppenheimer, who was the main scientist during the Manhattan Project. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the couple who were executed as Soviet spies who gave the Russians the information needed to give them the know-how to build an atomic bomb. Dalton Trumbo, we mentioned him, one of the blacklisted Hollywood 10, who was a screenwriter. And these were people who were known to be communists, and there's dozens and dozens more. This is by no means a complete list. These are just the names I plucked out of a list of hundreds where you might actually recognize who they are. If you don't recognize them, well, some of those people we're going to talk about. But if you don't recognize them, that's okay. the point is that many of these people had influence in their day. They were part of organizations that changed America, and usually not for the better. Now, in some cases, these people were converted later into capitalists or non-communists. Some people changed their stripes. Some people weren't all that bad. They had a little bit of this and that. They weren't just all full-bore socialist, communists, what have you. But some of them were. And these are people looked up to by the left today and trying to be emulated and a lot of their crap repeated even. So I have a list of these people, these individuals. There's quite a few here that we'll go into because we want to talk about these icons and these great colossal glittering jewels of colossal ignorance, and the impact they made, but more importantly the things that they said and did that make you, well, it will make you scratch your head. You will sit there and go, okay, maybe some of these people did some good works, but just listening to some of the quotes they did, just looking at some of the things they did, just looking at some of the things they said, or whatever, people they were associated with or organized, whatever, it will leave you going, why would anyone want to call that a role model in this country, knowing what America is and should be and all the rest? And I don't have an answer for it, folks, other than to say that, again, liberalism is a disease, and only a diseased mind would want to associate with these other diseased minds. Birds of a feather, I guess. So let's start out in no particular order, although it's somewhat older people to younger people, meaning historically chronological, but not perfectly chronological. W.E.B. Du Bois. Maybe you've heard of him. He was around from 1868 to 1963. Lived a while, almost 100 years. He was a militant activist in his day. He was a communist who later in his years, after all the crap he did, moved to Africa and was suddenly, no one heard from him again. Not really. He tried to turn the NAACP into a communist front, and that, of course, did not bode well and was not successful. He once told the Chinese, he was a guy who traveled the world, he once told the Chinese that they should welcome, prior to World War II, the Japanese imperial invaders as liberators. He once agitated, or constantly agitated against the United States, but once agitated against the U.S. And their aid to our allies, and was indicted by FDR's Department of Justice under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and was then fired by the NAACP as a result. He reversed his position, of course, when Germany turned on Russia in 1941. So, in other words, this typical liberal hypocrite was pro-commie and actually pro-Hitler until Hitler signed that pact with Stalin and then turned on, he was okay with it. But once he turned on Russia, all of a sudden, no bueno. So, again, more proof that liberals were favorites of fascists, and were fascists themselves in many ways. Eugene V. Debs. He was around from 1855 to 1926. Eugene was imprisoned twice. This gem was imprisoned 2 times, once for failing to desist in his actions after the Pullman strike of 1894 was concluded. He wanted to keep striking, and he was, I think, guilty of not just there's no failure to desist, but I think he was indicted for in the courtroom itself for not stopping, basically. But more importantly, he was also indicted and in jail for trying to encourage men to avoid the draft during World War One. He would go out there and tell men not to go enlist and ignore the draft. You think that had any influence maybe in the 1960s when that same thing was being done by similar type leftists? He ran as a socialist candidate for president 5 different times and failed, of course, every one. Socialists cannot win in the United States of America. But he actually ran one of those times from his jail cell. Yeah, that's the way of getting out and meeting and greeting the people. He belonged to the IWW, an infamous organization called the Industrial Workers of the World. Socialist, communist, whatever. It promoted the violent overthrow of capitalism in favor of socialism. That was their basic mission statement. Violent overthrow. And of course, he was one of Bernie Sanders' idols. Again, for the modern current events part of our little video, there's a lot of burnouts out there, as we like to call them. A lot of Bernie Sanders fans who think socialism is cute and fun and fluffy and whatever. But these are the kind of people they admire. Convicts, people who like to violently overthrow people, people who like to uproot capitalism and Americanism and everything else in favor of their little utopian beliefs. And all I can say is this: if your ideas are so great, if socialism and communism is so great, why hasn't it happened in this country? Because something greater happened in this country. Capitalism, free markets, constitutional republic. We'll continue with our list in part 2. We'll try to get through this as quick as we can, and then we'll get into some other things. So we'll see you on the next one.